Good morning, children. Welcome to the third installment to the How to Listen series, How to Listen Reverb Edition. Let's go. Reverbs are hard because you really can't tell what a mixer used by listening to a finished record. It's difficult. Sometimes, there's a break and there's a long tail and you can kind of identify the tail of it, but most of the time it's really guesswork. So what I propose we do is listen to a bunch of different kinds of reverbs, and I'm going to point to you the important things so you can learn to recognize the different colors. And then we'll apply that to a vocal, in the context of a song, and look at the differences of vibes and blending that they do, and then you can go from there. So first step is to listen to the different kinds of reverb. I have here a Tomboy song called The Light. I'm going to solo the vocal on the verse, and this is the vocal super dry.
On that day and in that heat, with all the light hung over me.
Sounds great. You can hear the bleed of the bass drum from the headphones. Pretty bananas. I'm going to turn on a plate, and I'm using an EMT plate.
On that day and in that heat, with all the light hung over me.
Hear that tail? You can hear the slightly metallic quality of it. Not metallic as in annoying metallic, but metallic as in kind of like a lush, big piece of matter just vibrating. I'll play it again. Listen also to the early reflections, basically what happens just as the vocal gets into the reverb, the blooming at the beginning.
On that day.
Hear that on part?
On that day and in that heat.
So you hear that? That sounds great. I'm choosing reverb B on the EMT plate by Universal Audio because I don't know why that's the one I usually like. Let me compare with a real plate. I have a real plate. So this is the EMT.
On that day and in that heat. On that day and in that heat.
Tail is a little longer. Maybe I'll make this one a little longer. And also it's a little fatter, so I'm going to remove the high pass on the plugin. Again, this is the real plate.
On that day and in that heat. On that day and in that heat.
The UA plate is pretty badass, eh? You just heard it against the real thing. So either way, real or plugin, you can hear that it basically gives you a really nice bloom right after the vocal, and then a bit of a tail that thins out and is very smooth. Now let's listen to a spring. In this case, I have the PSP in excellence. It is indeed excellent. Listen very carefully to what's going on at the beginning of the blooming of the reverb.
On that day and in that heat.
Heard that? Again.
On that day and in that heat.
Very nice. So you get a thinner bloom, but a denser bloom. Check it out. This is the plate. This is the spring. It's a little shorter, but what's important is the density of it. In the sauce, the differences between the different types of reverb will be, fading out rapidly. But the early reflection type of it is what really matters. So check out the early reflection, again, of this PSP spring.
On that day and in that heat.
Here on that ease, let's listen to that.
On that day and in that heat.
Compare with a real BX10.
On that day and in that heat. with all
a little denser, but a little fuzzier. Check out the tail. Hear that? That is very characteristic of a spring. Plug in. Smoother. They smoothed it out. So this actually could be useful. So if you want something dirtier, maybe you want to find yourself a BX10. If you want something that blends better, the Nexcellence is great. So that was a spring reverb. Let's listen to a hall. I'm using the Space Hall, and I'm using this really good IR. I thought it was really nice. Check it out.
On that day and in that heat.
That really sounds like a hall. It's a really good IR.
On that day and in that heat.
What's interesting with halls is instead of being just tail, like there's a little bit of a high quality to it, right? Compare the hall with the plate. This is the hall.
On that day and in that heat. On that day and in that heat.
So the early reflection of the hall actually give you a certain height feeling. They're not as surrounding the vocal, they're more kind of airy above the vocal, which is great. You can remember that. Let's compare this IR of the hall with a algorithmic hall by these lovely people at Wahala.
On that day and in that heat.
You'll notice that it doesn't really sound as natural a hall as an IR, but it's nice and airy and useful. This is the IR. Tail is a little shorter. Let's shorten this tail a little further to see what happens. A little further. Let's compare again. We have our IR.
On that day.
And the algorithmic one.
On that day.
Let's listen to this in the track with a little more returns, because as you notice, when we play the track, the reverb kind of like gets sponged up by the rest of the track. So this is why you should always set up your reverbs in the track, but that's not the discussion here, we're just listening. The hall as an IR.
On that day and in that heat. On that day and in that heat.
Right now, I like the IR better, right? You hear the fact that the algorithm one sounds a little thicker and everything. And this is where the can of worms open, because you can change that. Say I could high pass the return here and use the low cut, and now it sounds like this. A little more.
On that day and in that heat. On that day and in that heat.
They are now a lot closer to each other. Let's listen in solo again. IR.
On that day and in that heat.
Algorithm.
On that day and in that heat.
One tweak and they get a lot closer. And now the 5 minutes of tweaking, I can make one sound like the other, or close enough for jazz, considering it's going to be in the sauce and nobody's going to hear the difference. And that is the key here. There's a lot of talk about, oh man, this reverb plugin is bananas and that reverb plugin is special and you got to buy yourself a precasting. They all have their value. They all do something great. But if you know what you're listening for, you should be able to create the sound you want. What I'm hearing here is when I compare, for example, the hall with the plate.
On that day. On
That's what makes a difference. Meaning, I have a hall that's kind of airy, like this, not hairy, airy. And then I have a plate that gives me kind of a tail and a surrounding place around the vocal. That's what you have to listen for. Listening between two different halls, if the plugin is of quality or your hardware is of quality, you will get a pretty good idea of what you're doing, and it will not make a world of difference. Unless you're making a wide open record with just, say, David Crosby in the middle who sings very quietly and everything, you can hear a fly fart from the other side of the room. But apart from that situation, when you're making a record that has a lot of density, it doesn't really matter what the plugin is as long as it's decent quality. And these days, most plugins are really, really good quality. So what matters is that you learn the different types, so that when you put the reverb on, you're already putting the reverb that you think you're gonna need to create the space that you want. The idea here is to learn the different colors. So we've seen plate, we've seen a spring, which has the biggest sonic imprint. We've seen a hall. Now let's look at what people call chambers, or also rooms. A room and a chamber is the same thing. What made chambers really popular is partly Capitol Studio A in LA, where all those chambers were used for all those classic records. And also the fact that Lexicon came out with a really good chamber algorithm on their 480s and then all the subsequents, like a PCM 70, for example. So let's listen to what a chamber sounds like, or a room sounds like. Here I'm using the soft tube reverb, the small one. I like it, it's great, and it's very nimble on DSP. Check it out.
On that day and in that heat.
Let's not forget that a hall is a big room. So the reason why there are different algorithms is because of the early reflections. The early reflections in a small room are very different from the early reflections in a big room. And that's why those plugins are trying to recreate, or those IRs are trying to capture. Listen to the early reflection, what's right after the vocal on this algorithm.
On that day and in that heat.
Compare with the hall.
On that day and in that heat.
Same family, just a lot closer on the room and brighter too, right? More early reflections.
On that day and in that heat.
By the way, for comparison, I have here a PCM 70 with the classic Lexicon chamber. It's in the loop, so you can hear the actual PCM 70.
On that day and in that heat.
So listen to just the tail. It's nice and smooth. Listen to the soft tube. Also nice and smooth. Slightly different, but not that far away. If I play it in the track, you won't be able to tell the difference between the two. That is a room. So let's compare a room to, for example, say a plate.
On that day. On that day.
Obviously, the length gives it away. And versus the spring, here's the room or chamber.
On that day. On that day and in.
Chamber.
On that day.
Close cousins, right? Those early reflection. The tail is the difference here, and the slightly more ringy quality of the spring. But it's not a night and day thing. Obviously, the designers who came up with the spring reverbs or the plate reverbs were trying to recreate the real thing, so you didn't have to have a chamber or you didn't have to have a hall if you wanted to work in post. So clearly, the spring reverb, for example, is trying to recreate the feeling of a room in this case, and it's pretty close. It's not perfect because you have physical limitations, but it's pretty close. Is it night and day? No. Now, if we're talking about the spring reverb on a Fender amp, that's a whole different thing. That's an effect. That's cool too. But here we're talking about reverbs that are trying to be room-like or natural. One more. Let's listen to the ambience.
On that day and in that heat.
Let me remind you what it sounds like dry.
On that day and in that heat. On that day and in that heat.
Pretty awesome, right? I use this a lot. I use it, sometimes it's called the office. Sometimes I use very short delays. It's basically almost all early reflections blending into each other to create a space, kind of like a very short room, but a certain intimacy on the vocal. Again, dry.
On that day and in that heat. On that day and in that heat.
It removes that rough edge of having nothing in between the notes, but it doesn't give you any garbage or any tail. That ambience algorithm is really practical to be able to fill the holes in between two notes on an instrument, vocal or whatever, but not add any tail garbage or any heavy stuff that you have to pull on and try and EQ or do things. It's just very discreet, which is why when it showed up on the Lexicon reverbs in the 80s, I think, early 80s, it became very popular. It's also available on the AMS. In my taste, the one on the AMS is a little bright. I'm going to show you. It's a little bright, a little digital. However, it is the sound of 1983. So this is the revibe.
On that day and in that heat.
It really sounds like a Lexicon to me. I really like that sound. Let me get the AMS. And UA did a badass job at making it sound exactly the same as my AMS. It's just, I'm not a fan of that algorithm for myself, unless I'm trying to do, you know, a Thomas Dolby style record. Let's see.
On that day.
It's a little long. Let me shorten it. Close enough for rock and roll. Let's try 1.3. Yeah. Revibe. You know what? I think the plugin sounds better than my actual hardware reverb. Let's listen to it in the context.
On that day and in that heat.
In the context, I miss the bloom of the revibe.
On that day and in that heat.
Check it out in the track.
On that day and in that heat.
Reminder, this is dry.
On that day.
On that day. Listen to that.
On that day.
With the ambience.
On that day and in.
Much smoother. And if I switch to the AMS.
On that day.
Doesn't have the same sugar to go around the vocal. I play it again. First, the revibe.
On that day and in that heat.
AMS.
On that day and in that heat.
Doesn't feel the same. The revibe, which is a really good emulation of the Lexicon, to me does more what the ambience algorithm became very famous for. Now let's recap. I'm only going to use the first choices. I'm not going to use the alternates. The alternates were for entertainment.
On that day. On that day. On that day and in. On that day. On that day.
Quiz time. I'm going to play all 5 reverbs. I will not trick you, promise. And you're going to have to figure out which is which. There's a number over every example. Associate a number with the reverb. Have fun. Here we go.
On that day and in that heat. On that day. on that day and in that heat.
Got it? Sure? Ready for the answer? We're not putting the answer in the video so that you keep listening until you're 100% sure that you got it and internalize the sound of all those different reverbs. Let's talk about pre-delay for a second. A lot of reverb plugins and some hardware rack mount reverb have a pre-delay setting. What is the pre-delay? Back in the day, before the boxes had enough processing power to create real early reflection, or at least real sounding early reflections, what the designers did is they included a pre-delay, meaning you could delay the reverb. Instead of the reverb starting to bloom right when you send signal to it, you could delay that bloom, thus creating the illusion of size, right? Because if you're in a hall, a big room, it's going to take longer for the early reflections to get to your ears than if you're in a small room that actually creates the sound of the room, not the tail, the early reflections. So the idea was, well, if we have a digital reverb and it takes a while for the reverb to happen, then it would feel like the room is bigger and you'll get more of an illusion of space. Did it work? For debate. However, it is nice to be able to push the reverb back. Sometimes you can feel that the reverb crowds the vocal a little bit. Check it out with the plate.
On that day and in that heat.
Hear how it's very tight. It's pretty. What happens if I push it back like 70, 100 milliseconds?
On that day and in that heat.
Notice how on that day, it doesn't slap against the vocal the same? Check it out. I went a little too far. Here.
On that day and in that heat. On that day and in that heat.
It's useful, especially if you have a lot of reverb, like you're making a new Enya record or something. And it's nice to be able to push the reverb back a little bit so there's not so much on it. I don't use pre-delays a lot, but I hear it a lot in records because of mixers being used to the old boxes. With plugins like, for example, the Oxford plugin or a lot of the modern reverb plugins that are not trying to imitate an old box, the modern clean reverb plugins, they have early reflections. So the pre-delay is really kind of irrelevant unless you're trying to recreate the effect of the designer not having early reflections, trying to recreate the early reflections with the pre-delay. But that gets a little deep. So let's listen to the plate. Very short pre-delay and long pre-delay in the sauce. Check it out.
On that day and in that heat. On that day and in that heat. On that day and in that heat.
Listen to the word in that it.
On that day and in that heat. On that day and in that heat.
So when she leans into that in word, the reverb comes really quickly and bunches up a little bit. So in this particular case, if this reverb was only used for this vocal, it'd be kind of elegant to push it back a little bit and not have that crowding, not have the vocal feel dry, because if the vocal's dry, it sounds like this.
On that day and in that heat.
Very different vibe. And that is the fun part, because with reverbs, you can really, really decide the vibe and the tone of the track and the direction and even the style of the track based on the reverb. Will it be a big difference between a plate and a hall? It depends how much of it you use. If I use a lot of hall like this, check it out.
On that day and in that heat.
Versus a lot of plate.
On that day and in that heat.
We're entering the realm of taste, which is a beautiful thing. That's why we do what we do. What would I do for this particular track? Well, I don't remember what I did for the record. And I know this is a listening only video, but you know what? It's here and the song is awesome and she sounds great. What I would do is I would probably have a little bit of the tail, but not this fat. I would probably high pass it. See if you can hear the difference. And then I would have a little bit of hall for height, and then I would add some ambience and try and blend those three things.
On that day and in that heat. On that day.
A bit much for me, a bit less.
On that day and in that heat.
Might even high pass further on the plate so you don't hear it as much.
On that day and in that heat.
I'm happy with this right now. May change depending on the mood. And if the artist comes in and says, you know, I want it to sound more like, I don't know, with this bass, New Order, then I would have to go with something very cold and kind of long and very obviously reverberary. Or they say, we want it bone dry with just a little bit of ambience, which I kind of like. Check this out. This is awesome.
On that day and in that heat.
For this has a lot of attitude. Maybe this with a little bit of a reverb throw on some EMT or maybe a dynamic EMT coming in from time to time or something. I don't know. But I like the attitude of the dry thing. But it doesn't matter what I think. What matters now is you know the difference between a hall and a plate and a chamber/room and an ambience and a spring. And you can tell with your eyes closed without looking at the plugin. And that is awesome. Et voilà.